Welcome to Tales from Flat Space, a podcast of science fiction and fantasy by yours truly, Gina A. Pond. Just know that the stories in this podcast may contain content that could be disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. So this is Unity, Book 2 of the Survey Intragalactic series, Part 1 Prologue, Chapter 1. Marcus, are you done with the programming I asked you for? Demanded the man standing at my desk. Yes, Dr. Mills. I finished it yesterday. Didn't you get my email? I sighed. Harry Mills was a great physicist, but a crap manager. Why he ended up the head of this project, only the government knows. No, that's a lie. I knew. He was made the head of the project because he lowballed all the others who were fighting for the grant money. Most of those folks had gone on to greener pastures. I was grateful that this wasn't my real job, or I'd have quit in 2 weeks. Mills pulled out his tablet and tapped it. Oh, yes, so you did. Sorry, Marcus. Carry on. He walked away, muttering to himself. Fucking space brain, I thought to myself. This has to be one of the worst assignments I've gotten. My department head must hate me. Or maybe they just haze the newbies. I shrugged to myself and went back to the drudgery of coding the interface for the jump drive. Face it, Marcus Roner. You're stuck here for the duration. You might as well accept it. I sighed again, put on my headphones, and let myself get lost in the code. Which is why I didn't realize something was going on until my computer went out. Shit, I said, out loud to the empty office area. Everyone else had been in the lab working on the jump drive. So either Mills and company fucked up the computer again, or... I took off my headphones and heard slow footsteps coming into the office area. I ducked down and then peeked carefully around the edge of my cubicle. A short old man with a balding head and a dark gray suit was walking steadily down the hall, going into each cubicle for a minute or so, then coming back out again. At the third cubicle, he stopped as if listening to something, then said out loud, Keep looking. You can't be too far. They aren't allowed to leave the compound normally. Shit, I thought. I have to get out of here. I pressed the button on my wristcom that would have normally sent a mayday message to my handler, but when the display said no signal, I froze. Now what? I asked myself, beginning to panic, when suddenly a little silver cube was floating in front of me. I stared at it, then tried to swat it away, but it evaded my hands. The gray man seemed to come out of nowhere and stood in front of me. When did he go quiet? Fuck, he's way better than me. The man tisked and shook his head. Well, it seems that Unity intelligence training isn't what it used to be. Shame. Oh well, sedate him. The cube quickly bumped my neck, jabbing me with a needle. The man gave me a disappointed look. My last thought before I blacked out was, fuck. I woke up briefly in a gel tank with a breather over my face and the rest of me wired up for long-term high-G sedated travel. I tried to sit up, but I was strapped in. When I looked around, I could see all the other scientists strapped into tanks alongside me. I started to panic, but someone came over to the tank and said, Oh no, this won't do. A few seconds later, my body went numb and I blacked out again. The next time I woke, I was lying on a cot in a large room. Mills and the other 4 scientists from the jump drive program were also waking up. Bloody hell, Derek, one of the engineers, mumbled. What bleeding truck ran us the fuck over? I don't know, Tara, the other engineer, said. My mouth feels like old carpet. Gail, the deputy director, was first to try to stand. Same here. You 3 okay? She asked the rest of us. Kevin, the mathematician, nodded. Yeah, I replied. Dr. Mills groaned, but waved weakly. I looked around the room. Besides the cots, there was a large conference table with chairs, something that looked like a food printer on the wall, and 2 doors. One was open and one was closed. Tara was closest to the open door, and so she went to investigate. Found the loo, she said. I heard a door close. A couple of others followed. I stayed seated while I surveyed the room since my body felt pretty wobbly. There were no other obvious ways in or out. I got up and made my way carefully over to the food printer, which thankfully was functional. I dialed in an electrolyte drink. "Food printer works," I reported to the others. I dialed in a second electrolyte drink and brought it over to Mills. While the man might be scatterbrained, he was also much older than the rest of us, and the way we traveled here was hard on the body. "Thanks," Mills said, taking careful sips of the liquid. I did the same. After we had all taken care of necessities and had something to drink, the closed door opened, admitting of the bald man I had seen in the lab. He was still wearing a dark gray suit, along with leather gloves and boots, and was carrying a metal briefcase. We all stared at him as he walked to the table, opened the case, and pulled out a small black cube and a larger silver cube. He closed the case and put it on the floor beside him, then sat at the head of the table. "Please, sit, all of you." "Who the fuck are you?" demanded Derek. "I am John Smith, the head librarian. Sometimes I'm called the Gray Man. You are currently guests of the library," the man replied calmly. "The library? What the hell is that?" asked Kevin. "Apparently the name of wherever we happen to be," said Dr. Mills, also surprisingly calm. "All of you sit down. I'm sure Mr. Smith will give us an explanation of why we were abducted." "No fucking way," said Derek. "I want to know who the fuck you are and where the fuck we are right now. And I think everyone should shut up until we can contact lawyers." Mr. Smith sighed. "As I already told you, you are guests of the library. To be more specific, you are on board a survey ship named Sun Tzu." I felt the blood drain from my face. Sun Tzu? Not many people had been on survey ships. Fewer people knew that there were 7 capital ships, each of which had a specific purpose. While I didn't remember all of them, there were 2 that intelligence officers were always briefed on, Musashi and Sun Tzu. These respectively housed the military and intelligence arms of Survey. It was the first time I'd ever heard of Sun Tzu being called the library, but no one in our agency had really good or current information. The legends of these 2 ships and their run-ins with Unity Fleet definitely did not favor Fleet. "Survey?" Derek said. "Whatever. I don't give a fuck who you are. Take us back right now." "Derek, shut up," I said. "Oh, fuck off, Marcus." He turned back to Mr. Smith. "We have rights and I want a lawyer." "I'm sorry, Derek, is it? That is quite impossible. You see, as you were sleeping, we've jumped over 100 light years from where you were." "What?" Derek yelled. Mr. Smith gestured to the nearest empty chair. "If you sit down, I can explain things to you." "Sit, Derek," Mills said. "I'd like to hear why Survey has captured Unity government workers from a top-secret laboratory and interrupted very important scientific work." Derek obeyed the director reluctantly. Mr. Smith leaned forward. "We have interrupted your very important scientific work because if you had continued that work, you would most likely have destroyed the planet you were on, or the solar system, or maybe even the galaxy." Mills raised his eyebrows. "You're kidding, right? We're just creating a jump engine. This is ridiculous. This is only because you survey people are so stingy with giving us engines that we're trying to make our own." I was surprised. Mills usually came off as completely scatterbrained, but now he seemed much more astute. Maybe I underestimated him? Or maybe he's more serious when someone threatens his work. I wanted to shout at him to just do what Survey wanted, but Mills never really listened to me before, so I didn't think he'd do it now. The others waited to see what would happen next. I had a feeling that Mr. Smith was not impressed with Dr. Mills. "No, Doctor, I am not kidding. We have a very good reason for being stingy, as you say. The technology is extremely dangerous and must not be attempted by humans." Maybe he's right," I said out loud. The others looked at me. "What, you don't believe him? Come on, we all know that Survey has better tech than we do. I've heard some stories about Sun Tzu. Seriously, if they don't think we should be fucking around with this, then they probably have good reasons for it." Derek started to say something to me, but Gail cut him off. Why shouldn't we work on it, Mr. Smith? She asked. The first time a human attempted to experiment with jump drive technology, they destroyed an entire solar system whilst vaporizing themselves in the process. The second time a human's understanding of jump drives was used, it destroyed 2 star systems, one of which had proto-sentient life on its 4th planet. Fuck, I said. He's just saying that to scare us, said Derek. They don't give a shit about us. They just want to make more profit of us and keep their trade exclusive. Dude, seriously? I said. Why would they bother kidnapping us from what we thought was a secure facility and transporting us 100 light years away if they didn't give a shit about us? Why would they fake this? That would be a waste of resources, just like bringing you along. What was that, you little shit? Derek yelled, standing up. Activate and mark, said Mr. Smith calmly. The silver cube seemed to melt into 6 smaller cubes, which suddenly launched themselves from their position in front of Mr. Smith to right in front of our noses. I stayed absolutely still, remembering the last time I encountered one of these. Mills moved his chair backwards, nearly falling over. Gail, Tara, Kevin moved back as well. Derek, the moron, started trying to catch the little silver cube, but it kept moving just out of reach. At least it kept him occupied enough to shut him up. The bald man sighed. I suggest you stop that, Derek, and sit back down. I would hate to have to sedate you again. Derek complied, sullenly, glowering at Mr. Smith. I'm giving all of you a choice. You can stay here with Survey for the rest of your lives, pursuing other work in your field of expertise. Or you can die. Here, today, right now, in this room. If you choose not to live with us in Survey, we can offer you a quick and merciful death. If you had stayed where you were, things would have gone badly for you anyway. All of those interested in this technology would have attempted to capture you, and, if successful, would have tortured you to find out what you knew. We had intelligence that one of those groups would have been your own government. Mr. Smith, really? Dr. Mills tried to interrupt. Yes, Doctor, you would like proof. He rapped his knuckles on the table twice, and a screen rose up from the middle. Then he tapped on the black cube, and footage began to play of a sun going nova. Rather than a typical collapse followed by an explosion, it looked like a wave passed across the star, consuming it in a massive fireball over the period of about 5 seconds. The table in front of Mills lit up, and I craned my head to see what it was. It lit up in front of Gail, too, and she scrolled through it. Is this for real? She asked Mr. Smith. That was real-time data that our brother ship, the Musashi, covered at this event, the second use of human-derived jump equations. As you can see, the output was 10 to the 28 times more powerful than Earth's most powerful nuclear weapon, and an order of magnitude more powerful than a Type 1A supernova. As I said, this blast took out 2 star systems and badly damaged the ship that triggered it. Gail turned white, as did Mills. Apparently the data was enough to convince them of the severity of the issue. Derek still looked confused, but watching a sun go nova in an obviously unnatural way seemed to continue to keep him quiet. That and the silver cubes still floating in front of each of us. You will have a good life with Survey. There will be no need for you to apply for grants. You can undertake almost any research problem you'd like to apply yourself to. You can pursue other careers if you like. Your needs will be provided for no matter what you choose. Our society isn't based on capitalism, and you'll find our resources more than adequate. Mr. Smith attempted a smile, but it wasn't reassuring. It didn't seem a hard choice to me. I'll stay, I said. Mr. Smith nodded. Everyone seemed unsure except for Derek. He stood up again. No, I won't agree. Send me back now. Mr. Smith frowned. Derek, I already told you that we can't. I have rights. You can't force me to stay. I want a lawyer. That footage has to be faked. Mr. Smith frowned. That is your decision, then? What? No. You can't do anything to me. I know Survey and Earth have a treaty. Mr. Smith stood, his face as hard as marble. For a short man, he could be very intimidating. Mr. Derek Edgars, all governments have those who work outside of the laws and treaties to maintain order. I am one of those people. Picket 6, execute. The silver cube moved so fast that none of us realized that it had gone straight through Derek's head until it slammed to a stop in the wall at the other side of his skull. A spray of blood and gore spattered the wall behind him. There was a brief look of surprise on Derek's face, then he fell to the floor. After a moment, I could smell urine. Tara ran for the bathroom, her silver cube following her. I managed to keep my bowels from doing things they really shouldn't, but it was a close thing. Aside from Mr. Roner, would anyone else like to stay? The others agreed quickly, studiously not looking at Derek's body on the floor. Tara joined us in agreement just as rapidly after she returned to the table. Good. My assistant Jane will be coming in soon to brief you on your options. We believe we've found interesting postings for each of you. There are showers in there and with fresh clothing if you'd like to use them. He picked up the silver case and opened it. Pickett's return. The silver cubes merged into a large cube again, with one corner stained in blood. Mr. Smith put both cubes back in his case and closed it. He picked up the case, then walked towards the door, his footsteps echoing in the room. As he reached the door, he turned to look at me. Mr. Roner, if you would come with me, please. I stood up and immediately obeyed, relieved to leave the room and the other scientists behind. Mr. Smith led me through a maze of corridors until we came to another door. He palmed it open, and we walked into a workshop area, where a woman sat at a bench repairing some sort of equipment. She looked up as we approached. Ah, John, how'd it go? She asked. Well, Joe, we lost one, regrettably. He opened the case and handed her the silver cube. Sorry to have to dirty them like this. Shame. Couldn't be helped, I suppose? No. She looked around Mr. Smith to me. New recruit? She asked. Possibly, he said. Good luck, kid, she said, taking the cube away. Mr. Smith motioned for me to follow him. When we eventually stopped, he palmed open a door to an office. Please, come in, he said. He took off his jacket and hung it on an old-fashioned wooden coat rack, then sat at an equally old-fashioned desk. He set the case on the floor next to him, then peeled off his gloves and placed them carefully on his desk. So, Sun Tzu, what do you think? Mr. Smith said. I took the chair across from the desk from him. His academy and college scores look good, and as you say, we can always use more computer experts. Unlike the others, he kept his wits about him. He'll need some better tradecraft training, but that can't be helped. He was woefully undertrained by UI. I'm right here, I said. Not that I didn't agree with that assessment. Yes, Mr. Roner, but you are currently being evaluated by Sun Tzu. You will keep quiet. I felt my eyes widen. It was true, then? The ship was run by an AI? Yes, John, I will take him in. I'm sure you and Jane will find him useful. Mr. Smith smiled again, but it didn't offer any comfort. Congratulations, Mr. Roner. You are now a fully fledged Survey citizen and are welcomed by Sun Tzu to join the ranks of the librarians. That was the AI. They're real. I am very real, Marcus, and you may call me Sonny. Sonny? Yes, I let all of my people call me Sonny if they wish. I'm not so formal as my brother Musashi, Sun Tzu explained. You could choose to go somewhere else and survey, but I think your talents would be better suited for our projects here. Our work is likely to be much more interesting to you than other ships. Sure, I said. Can I ask a question? Mr. Smith nodded. What about the black cube? Where is that stored? I'm guessing that doesn't come out for just anyone, I asked. Mr. Smith raised an eyebrow. No, Marcus, it doesn't. That recording is stored in a special vault. My assistant and I will take care of it later. Very observant, Marcus. What happened to the ship that made the Nova? Mr. Smith frowned. He has exiled himself. Where, we do not know. He sustained a great deal of damage, both physically and mentally. Thankfully, he surrendered the data he used to create the Nova to us. My brain started putting things together. You think there are people who would want to get their hands on this? Who wouldn't use it for a jump drive, right? That's why you took us. I'm guessing you torched the lab too? The man nodded. Good deduction. And I can help keep this out of the wrong hands if I stay here? Among other things, Mr. Smith replied, looking like the cat that caught the canary. Okay, Mr. Smith, Sonny, count me in. Mr. Smith gave a genuine smile, stood, and shook my hand. You can call me John. Come, I'll give you a tour of the stacks. You mean there's a real library in here? Of course. Did you think it was just a code name? I said. Mr. Smith laughed as he led me through the door. John Smith. Come in, John. Thank you for coming, said Control through Sun Tzu's comms. Said Control through Sun Tzu's comms output as the door opened to their rooms. Somehow, Sun Tzu had made it sound distinct, as if they were actually speaking with their physical voice. This part of their quarters wasn't really an office, but a control center with multiple screens and consoles from floor to ceiling. How they could read them all, I didn't know. But then again, they were enhanced much more than the average captain of a survey ship. I came quietly over to where they were sitting in front of the consoles. The room was always disturbing to me, but I wasn't completely comfortable with the idea of enhancements. John Smiths rarely were. I love Sun Tzu, but to have them in my mind all the time would have been a disturbing lack of control. I take it you've seen the increase in chatter? Yes. They didn't say anything more for several minutes. I could see them looking at consoles and screens, assimilating information. I waited patiently. Control would sometimes forget that they needed verbal speech. It made me wonder why Sun Tzu bothered with a human captain at all. Then again, there are some leaps of logic that humans make that AIs can't. Or so Sun Tzu has told me. You need not lock up the data cube this time, John. We need to move up our timetable. Take the package to Musashi. Your demon is prepped and ready to go, said Sun Tzu. Musashi is expecting you. I was a little surprised. I didn't ask if they were sure, though, because they always were sure. Do we have all the assets we need? We will. Do I need to acquire them? No. Control turned from the consoles. They are already in play. Understood. I will leave within the hour, then. I'll need to brief Jane before I leave. How's our new asset? They asked. Useful, just as you both predicted. He's also been informative about the state of Unity Hub and Unity Intelligence. He's confirmed some of your suspicions. Control sighed. I wonder if we should have dealt with the Owenites sooner. I shook my head. You know as well as I do how that would have turned out. No, we stick with our plan. I turned to leave, then stopped. There's nothing else I need to know, is there? Clock is ticking now, John. We're running out of time. Understood. I will see you when I return. Control nodded and turned back to their consoles. I left the room, and the door closed behind me. I tapped my wristcom. Jane, meet me at my airlock in 20 minutes. It's time. Acknowledged, she said, and I made my way to my office to retrieve the data cube. I frowned. Fallout was going to be bad, but it would be even worse if things went unchecked. I sighed. If only humans could be less damn predictable, I thought. Part 2. Station. Chapter 2. Jack. The mess hall was crowded, even after the lunchtime rush. Maybe I should have just reported in and gone to quarters, I thought. The room started to shrink as the noise of so many people pressed in. Breathe. Just breathe, Jack. You're in safe territory. I took a few deep breaths, like the counselor back on Earth taught me, but my heart was still racing and my muscles were starting to get tight. I closed my eyes and rubbed my head with my free hand, sure I was going to find it soaked with sweat. Thankfully, I could only feel a little dampness. I grabbed the handle of my duffel, intending to leave, but that felt like too much as well. It was a mistake coming here. I know it. I should have taken a nice desk job back on Earth. Or retired. There was a click of a tray being set down in front of me, and then the heavier click of a coffee mug on the table. Surprised, out of my panic, I glanced up at the tray invading my space. It held a plate of mystery meat and an exceptionally large mug. Across from me, an older, white-haired, dark-skinned woman in a lieutenant commander's uniform sat down and started eating her dinner. What the? The woman looked over at me and smiled. You're new here, right? She took a long drink out of the large mug. While she did so, one of the wait staff brought over a mug and set it in front of me. What is that, Ensign? I asked. It's tea, sir. But I didn't order any tea. She ordered it for you, sir. The attendant scurried over to clear the table on the far side of the room. I glared at the woman sitting across from me. Ma'am, not to be rude, but who are you and why the hell did you order me tea? I was trying to steady my breathing as panic started to flare up again. The sleeping dragon of anger in the pit of my stomach started to uncurl a bit. Oh no, oh gods, no. I attempted to take another steadying breath. The dragon curled back up, but was wary. The woman kept her eyes steady on me, as if she was staring into my soul. She nodded to herself and then said, Drink that tea, friend. It's an old family recipe. It'll calm you right down. I picked up the cup and sniffed. Some sort of mint and herb brew. Well, I thought, can't be worse than any other medicine I'm already taking. I took a sip, and funny enough, she was right. The herb taste was cozy, a little smoky, but also refreshing. It seemed familiar to me, but I couldn't place why, especially since I've mostly had Ship's food printer coffee for the last few weeks. She watched as I took a sip, then she dived back into her meal again. I took a few more sips, and the panic that was rising in me a minute ago started to recede. Well, it seems like your family knew a thing or two, I said. It sounded kind of silly after I said it, but the woman didn't seem to mind. She nodded. There's a flash of sadness in her eyes for a moment. Then she said, You feeling better now? Yes, actually. How? You look like you needed some help and some distraction, so I gave you both. She finished the last of her food, picked up her mug, and said, Now, I gotta run, but you finish all of that, okay? It should keep you all right for a few hours. And with that, she walked off down the main gangway. I looked at my own cup and shrugged. Better than showing up all panicked when checking in, I thought, and down the rest of the tea. Strange, she didn't tell me her name. I shrugged to myself, grabbed my duffel, and went to find out where my quarters were. Lieutenant, you're right on time. Great. Let me introduce you to your new charge. This is Reverend Marcia Brooks, the station's chaplain. I was still feeling disoriented from my arrival when I walked into the infirmary the next morning, so the doctor's excessive enthusiasm hit me like a slap. Things were still a little too loud, and I hadn't slept well, but thanks to the woman's tea, it didn't hit me as hard as it usually did. I paused at the door to see the woman from the mess in the doctor's office, holding that same mug in her hands. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Oh, that's great, I thought. First time my boss meets me and I'm in the middle of a panic attack. I awkwardly started to put my hand out when the woman stood up, closed the gap, and took it warmly in both of hers. Lieutenant Jack Kirby, right? She asked. I nodded. Well, you're still looking a little out of it, but you seem to be recovering okay. Did you finish the tea? Yes, ma'am. It helped a lot. The doctor chuckled. So she got you in the cafeteria with her tea, I see. I nodded. Marcia does that a lot. Not all the time, doctor, she said, smiling as she finally released my hand. Might want to consider my grandma's tea for some of your other PTSD patients, since I seem to be handing it out a lot. The chief medical officer smiled at the chaplain, poked the tablet he picked up, and then said, So, Jack, I heard back from your counselor on Earth with the mail from the cruiser, and I have your therapy regimen here. We can discuss the details later, but I've added Marcia's tea to the list. I do expect you to keep all your counseling appointments, and I'd like to see you at least every month to go over medication. You're on light duty for the time being to accommodate for your therapy, but I think you're in good hands. Well, Vicar, I have a senior staff meeting, so I'm sure you can handle things from here. Lieutenant? He nodded and left the office. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do, then asked, why does he call you Vicar? Marcia smiled. It's an old British term for a minister or priest. Dr. Carr is from London back on Earth, and I suppose old habits die hard. He started calling me that when we got here, and it stuck. Not that I mind. Besides, I think it's rather sweet of him. Oh, I said. The chaplain looked at me again with one of those soul-searching stares. Well, come on then, Mr. Kirby, let's go to my office so I can bring you up to speed. I followed her out of the infirmary, only then realizing just how small she was. I must be at least 2 heads taller than her. She didn't seem so short yesterday. The chaplain's office was tucked away in a corner of the station next to the station's chapel. Being a relatively small pre-call station, the chapel also served as a meeting room, a secondary mess hall for special occasions, and sometimes an entertainment room. Marcia palmed open the door and waved me inside. The room contained a desk, a couple of chairs, a couch, a terminal, various tablets, and some artwork that looked to be from some African tribe back on Earth. There wasn't a whole lot in her office, which wasn't a surprise. There's only so much one can bring with them on a ship. Take a seat, she started. So, I'm guessing either old Fred decided to send you my way without telling you what a religious program specialist does, or that you didn't bother to actually read the précis about your new job on the way here, or that you did but didn't quite figure out all of what's expected. I nodded. I did read the précis, but I figured there was more to it than the 3-paragraph explanation. Right, well, you know that nothing is ever really simple on a pre-call station. Your job isn't that difficult. Your primary duties are basically to be my secretary and logistics manager. Mostly you help me set up for services, keep track of my appointments, and make sure I don't run out of candles and incense. You'll also have comms duty and ops a few times a week, so make sure you swing by the XO's office to arrange it. Just remind her that she can't have you when we're doing services. Right now we have 3 regular services a week. 1 early on Wednesday mornings to accommodate night shift folks, 1 on Saturday evening, and 1 Sunday morning. Oh, and you'll need to check the chapel shrine every day to add fresh candles or clear out any old offerings. Any questions? I shook my head. Not really. Seems pretty straightforward. She gave me a look I couldn't interpret, but moved on. I do regular rotations with the medical staff since I have a psychology certification. But you don't need to be with me on those rotations unless we actually have an emergency. Then you'll be doing the other part of your job. I nodded. You do understand that I'm not allowed to carry weapons, right? I nodded again and asked, but why not? The manual didn't really explain. You're a fleet officer, so it's not like you don't know how to defend yourself or anything. That's true, and I do know some martial arts, but the Unity chaplains are forbidden by the New Geneva Convention to carry weapons. We're meant to be a symbol of peace, even in a military environment, and we're technically non-combatants. We don't even get weapons training without special dispensation. Of course, there's not really any wars that would necessitate that kind of real close-quarters combat these days, but you never know. So, are you ready to start now, or would you like to take a day or two to recover from jump lag? I shook my head. It's all the same to you. I'd rather work. I've been sitting on my butt for weeks coming from Earth, and, well, it wasn't all that exciting on the cruiser. Right then. Your desk is in the back of the chapel, so let's get you sorted. Then we'll start with the chapel and service duties. She stood up and made for the office door. I followed her, thinking that this might not be so bad after all. The first 2 weeks settled into a routine. Wake up, eat, go to the chapel to check in for the day. Marcia had a lot of people who came to her for both spiritual and regular counseling, and sometimes a bit of both. As I got to know Marcia, it turned out she was much more to people than just the chaplain. When she asked me to follow her on one of her rounds one afternoon so that I could see the medbay layout, I saw her give of herself to each of the few patients in a way that didn't feel like being preached to. She held hands, prayed, or even just sat in silence with one patient, comatose from a station module accident. It was interesting to me to see her reach out to these people. I really couldn't imagine giving that much of myself to anyone. And as the days went by, I realized I didn't have to. I was just the bodyguard, a grunt. My therapist, Dr. Adelson, had other thoughts about that. He kept trying to drag conversation out of me, almost bullying me into talking about what happened on my previous mission. Felt like he was pumping me for information, which rankled. At the 3rd session, I blurted out, "Listen, Doc, You want to know what happened to me? Ask my doc back on Earth or read my file. I'll even give you written permission to do so. I don't want to talk about it anymore, so can you just lay off me for a while? Aislinn gave me a look. Did all psychologists learn that look in shrink school, or what the hell? Then he sighed and said, all right. We'll take a couple of weeks off the daily sessions and see how you do. You have even a whiff of another panic attack, though. I want your ass in this office pronto. But you will see me in a couple of weeks to check in, understood? Yes, sir. The older man sighed. Go on, then. You're dismissed. I practically skipped out of the office like I was a kid let out of school for the holidays. My good mood even lasted until I got to my desk in the chapel, when I saw my messages. To Lieutenant Jack Kirby from Commander Jansen. Get your ass to my office once you're out of your counseling session. I think you've forgotten me? Jansen. Shit. I quickly acknowledged the email, then checked the XO's calendar. Thankfully, she was free, so I made my way to Ops. Good going, Jack. Damn this PTSD shit. Ops was at the fore end of the station, so not only was it at the heart of pre-call operations, it had the best views from its large windows. I didn't pay much attention to any of that as I rushed through it to the XO's office, opposite the lift. The ensign in the outer office looked up as I stopped at the door and straightened out my uniform. Can I help you, sir? He asked. Yeah, the XO sent for me. Oh, Lieutenant Kirby, right? I'll let Commander Jansen know you're here. He pressed a few buttons on the console. Yes? Came a female-sounding voice. Lieutenant Jack Kirby to see you, ma'am. Yes, our errant lieutenant. Send him in. The secretary gave me a sympathetic smile, then opened the door. I walked in, and the door closed behind me. The office wasn't all that much bigger than the chaplain's office, but had a lot more tech than personal effects. I stopped in front of the XO's desk, came to attention, and said, Lieutenant Jack Kirby reporting as ordered, sir. I waited for my dressing down. Oh, at ease, Kirby. I'm not going to bite your head off. Marcia let me know that you were learning your RPS duties the last couple of weeks. You're on light duty anyway, and we had your shifts covered. It's not a big deal. She motioned for me to sit. So, I know a lot of folks hate night work, but would you be willing to do a couple of third shifts during the week? I shrugged as I took the chair in front of her desk. Sure, I don't mind the night shift. Jansen eyed me for a second. Well, that's a first. Most folks hate night shifts. I shrugged again. I'm a night owl. It was only partially a lie. All right, then. I'm going to give you Monday and Thursday nights. I'll double-check with Marcia, but these shifts shouldn't interfere with your schedule with her. Yes, sir. That should be fine. She eyed him again, smiled, and said, I'm glad to have a real comms officer on board again. Our last one ended up getting recruited by the last survey ship that came here on leave. They recruit pre-call station folks? I thought they didn't need to do any recruiting. The rumor was that survey ships were like small traveling cities that roamed deep space, looking for new planets to colonize and raw materials. That was what I'd heard anyway. I had never seen one myself. Well, Jansen said with a laugh, it was more a recruitment by shotgun wedding. I gave a little bit of a smile. Right, I said. I also heard that survey ships tended to stay at some of the more remote stations for over a month or two in order to get news and supplies and to let their crew mingle with new people. Those kind of weddings weren't common, but they definitely were not unheard of. Most married persons tended to travel together if they weren't on Earth or a colony. Survey ships were designed to accommodate kids, but families in Unity usually headed for a colony before the kids hit school age. Glad to be of service, sir. She laughed. You'll do, Lieutenant. Report to Lieutenant Commander Foster at 2300 tonight. This Thursday you'll be working with the captain. They like to rotate shifts during the week so they can get to know all their ops staff. Most of your shift will be just triaging messages from the pre-call folks. Inbound ships respect our station nights, so they'll just check in and ferry folks over during station morning. She stood up and put out a hand. Foster will go over the rest. Welcome to Alpha 4413 station, Lieutenant. Thank you, sir, I said, as I stood up and saluted. She dismissed me with a wave, and I went back to my desk. Chapter 3. Jack. I was lighting the evening candles when I heard someone come into the chapel. I turned to see a young woman wearing an incense tag who I'd not seen before. She stared blankly at the altar. When I turned to her, she blinked and said, "You're not Marcia." No. My name's Jack. I'm her new assistant. She's in a counseling session right now. Anything I can do for you?" She shook her head. "You can come in and sit if you want. I'm just finishing up here, so you can have this area to yourself in a minute." She kept staring at me while I finished filling the offering bowls with water and putting flowers in some of them. I then set out a number of unlit tea light candles on a candle stand. The rest of the flowers I arranged in the vases on either side of the altar. The woman never moved. She just watched me go about my work until I finished and went in my cubicle to the back of the chapel. Marcia told me that one of my duties is to be aware of anyone coming into the chapel in crisis. Something about this woman told me that she might be one of those people. I'd started some work on the next fleet supply order when I heard a thud coming from the other side of the chapel. I jumped up from my chair into the chapel proper to find the young woman on the floor in front of the shrine, blood coming from one of her arms. I pressed the panic button on my wristcom, then dropped down beside her. Her right arm was covered with little scars from her elbows to her wrist. There were some smaller fresh cuts, and one large one at her wrist that looked deeper than the others. In her other hand was a small scalpel, which looked like one from the med bay. Gently, I took the scalpel from her, put it on a chair out of reach. I grabbed her wrist to put pressure on it. There was no room or thought for panic, or for anything except getting this woman the help she needed. "Ops," the wristcom trilled. "Medical emergency, chapel. Med team is alerted and on their way." I finally looked at the woman's face, which was completely blank, as if I wasn't even in the room. I couldn't think of anything to say to her, so I just stayed quiet until the med team came in. They converged on the woman like a flock of birds and pushed me out of the way. "We've got her now, Kirby. She'll be all right. Go ahead and clean up." Time skipped a beat, and suddenly the med team was gone, taking the woman with them. I didn't even know her name, I thought. Then the chapel disappeared and memory overtook me. "Janet, come on, you need to come eat." Jack pressed the door chime on our cubicle again. The commander, at least, rated some privacy. Not that the scaper was all that roomy. He knocked on the metal plating, then heard a percussive sound coming from inside the cubicle, but no answer to the knock. He punched his wristcom and called to the cockpit. "Ellis!" "Yeah, what?" "Open the commander's bunk, now." "Why? She said she wasn't to be disturbed." "Just do it, now." "All right, keep your shirt on, Kirby." The door hissed open and there was blood everywhere. "Janet!" I yelled, and rushed into the cubby, but it was too late. He backed out as the others rushed in, shaking his head. He could feel the bile rise in his throat. Someone stood in front of him, grabbed his hands, and said, "Kirby." He tried to get away from them, but the hands held firm. "Jack? Come back to us, Jack." I blinked, and it was Marcia standing before me, holding my hands. Right, I thought. Fuck me. "Let go," I said, a little harsher than I intended. She did, surprisingly gently. "All right, Jack. Tell me what happened with Marta." "Oh, that's her name," I thought, still feeling like I was in the scaper and not on station. "Jack?" she said calmly, and pointed to one of the chapel's chairs. "Stay there for a moment, okay?" I nodded, absently. She went to one of the cabinets and pulled out a package. She opened it and handed me a cleaning wipe. I started scrubbing my hands. "She came in looking for you," I said in a flat voice. "I let her know you were in a session, so I told her she could sit in the chapel. But then there was a thud, and I came out here and she was on the floor, and the blood, and I called the medics, and I didn't even know her name." Marcia took the bloody wipe and handed me a new one. "Her name is Marta, and she's been having trouble adjusting to station life. She's good at hiding how poorly she was actually doing, it seems." Marcia looked away, but not before I glimpsed a hard look on her face. She had taken to cutting herself for a while, and I thought she had stopped, but it looks like she hadn't. I think we'll need to send her back home. Thankfully, that's Harada Colony, which isn't too far by cruiser. I nodded. My hands were clean, but I could still see the blood. I kept scrubbing. Where were you just now, Jack, when I came in? Marcia asked. On the scaper, I said, before I realized I was saying it. Marcia nodded and said, You can stop now, Jack. I looked at my hands. They were rubbed raw, but clean. Oh. I handed her the wipe, and she put it with the others. She waited patiently for a few moments, then said, Jack, why don't you go to your quarters and rest? I can clean up here. I was about to say no, but when I turned and looked at the blood on the floor, the memories of the scaper started to surface again, and everything was suddenly too much. Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, I have comms tonight and Thursdays too. The older woman nodded. That's fine. You don't need to come until afternoon time on the days after your shift. Make sure you get some sleep in before tonight's shift, though. Yeah, I'll try, I said as I walked out the door. The station lighting lowered to its night mode at once 2300 rolled around. I was already in ops at my duty station when Foster came in. He went up to the command post and talked quickly with the commander on duty. She saluted and left. Foster walked over to me, offering his hand. Lieutenant Commander Mick Foster, he said. And you're Kirby. Jansen let me know you were starting on shift today. Apparently we're both night owl weirdos. Foster let go of my hand and moved over to the control chair. Yeah. It's usually quieter at night, I said. Foster smiled. Yeah, I get that. So, I see you got here early. Anything of interest? I sat back down and looked at what I had so far. Biological data for the scientists, weather data, and personal mail so far. It's a bit of a haul tonight. Damn, Kirby, that's fast. So good to have a real comms person around. Sure you don't want to do a full-time shift? Can't. Doctor's orders. Besides, I'm the RPS. Right. He pointed his finger at me. No sermons on the night shift, mister, Foster said with a laugh. Not my job. I just light the candles and carry the gun. Right then. Carry on, Kirby. Let me know if anything needs to be routed to the XO or the captain. Foster looked at his own console for a minute. Looks like it's just you and me tonight. Sims is in the med bay. Sims? I asked. Yeah, Marta. I'd heard someone had an accident today, but I didn't realize it was her. Well, no scheduled shifts tonight, so hopefully it's just a quiet night of filing for us. Yes, sir. Foster laughed. You can call me Mick. Sir makes me feel as old as captain. Although, don't tell him I said that. No worries, I said, and got back to work. The night was indeed quiet, and the mail from the pre-call team was standard stuff. I sifted through the messages, routing anything private to go out on the next picket with the rest of the status updates. By the time my shift was over at 0700, I was exhausted. I had just enough energy to use the head and ended up falling asleep, still in my uniform. Before my next comm shift, nightmares woke me up before my alarm did. I grabbed some dinner, then headed to ops early. But my shift isn't over yet, said the ensign on duty. No worries, I got you covered. Only a couple hours till you get off anyway. Mess hall still has some pie left. It's apple. I raised my eyebrows at them. They opened their mouth and closed it again. Pies were a rare treat from the chef, and apple pies were the rarest of all, since there were only 2 apple trees in hydroponics. There were only a few times a year that they'd get enough to make pies for the mess hall. You're the best, Jack. I owe you one. No, you don't. I've already had my pie. The ensign, whose name I couldn't remember, ran off, waving. I smiled. Bribing fellow crew members with pie to do more work? Now that's a first. Startled, I turned around and saw the captain standing near my station with a grin on their face. I got up early, you see, and... The captain put up a hand. Just don't do it too often, Mr. Kirby, especially with the ensigns. They need the experience too, you know. Yes, sir. At ease, Lieutenant. Let's do some introductions, shall we? I'm Captain Sam Beckett. They stepped forward and shook my hand. You don't have to introduce yourself to me, Mr. Kirby. I heard about what you did for Marta. Poor thing. I figured you'd like to know that we're sending her back to her Rada colony. We put out a priority message yesterday, so the next carrier should be able to get her home. They let go of my hand and took the control chair. Thank you for being there for her. I took a breath. I didn't do all that much, sir. Nonsense. You saved her life in more ways than one. Beckett started pulling up screens and looking at data. You should go see her before she leaves. Yes, sir, I said, and went back to my station. There was a priority message waiting. To A4413 station, Captain Sam Beckett, CC CMO Car, Chaplain Brooks, from UNV 47, Roanoke. Subject medical priority. Message delay to beacon, 2 days. Receive priority message. Time to station 4 days per timestamp of this message. CMO of Roanoke apprised, bringing cargo to Earth by way of your sector and Harada. Have a present for you and your crew, Sam. Figured you deep space folks need a pick-me-up. A. Mitchell, Captain. Sir, we have a message from UNV 47. They're coming to pick up Marta. And something about a present? Beckett smiled. Pass it to my station. They read it over and smiled again. Oh, excellent. It's the Roanoke. Her captain and I are old friends from our academy days. She likes to find treats for the pre-call station, since our contact with folks is a bit limited after call 2. They looked up as Foster walked in. You're in luck, Mick. Captain Mitchell got our message. Really? Excellent. I hope it's new Brazilian coffee. The commander rubbed his hands with glee. Thought the captain. Probably not. They're in the wrong sector for a stop there. That would be the right sector for some Genovian chocolate, though. Foster laughed. If you ever want to get in good with the captain, get them some Genovian chocolates. Man, it's been a long time since I've been to Geneva Colony. I grinned. Geneva Colony was one of the first of the inner colonies, settled mostly by colonists from what was once Switzerland on Earth. One of their agronomists had the bright idea to import cocoa pods, which happened to grow really well there. When the colony opened up for general colonization, they recruited some of the best chocolatiers from Earth, and now they had the best chocolate in Unity. I thought it was even better than Earth's, and it made my mouth water just thinking about it. I turned back to my readouts. That would be hard, since I'd probably eat them all before they got anywhere near the captain, I said. The 2 officers laughed. I wouldn't blame you, Kirby, chuckled the captain, and they settled in for the rest of the shift. I tried not to think about Marta. Beckett, you old MB, how the hell are ya? Captain Andrea Mitchell yelled as she climbed down from the ZRG core with a large box. She was a tall, thin woman with long, straight black hair, and she seemed to take up space with just her presence. She jumped the last 2 steps and gave the other captain a bone-crushing hug. I was amazed at how gracefully she moved, even though she had just been in ZRG. The captain hugged her back. Good to see you too, you old hag. So, what have you brought me? They flashed a roguish grin. Right to it, eh? All right, but only because you can't stay on station too long. I brought you some Genovian goodies. The captain looked at me as if to say, see, I was right. I smiled back because, really, who wouldn't be happy about Genovian chocolate? So, since I knew I was in the neighborhood, I splurged a bit on your behalf. I have about 10 kilos of Genovian cocoa powder to make your chef really happy. I have some real eggs from our last stop for him, too. I have enough 4 Bonbon Delight boxes for the crew and some 6 Bonbon boxes for your senior staff. And in here, a special one for you, my friend. She opened the large box with a flourish. The captain pulled out a huge chocolate rabbit about 50 centimeters long. Beckett cracked up laughing, and the other officers walking the corridor stopped and stared. A few folks chuckled and moved on, but others were looking at the chocolate rabbit with envy. I stood there, confused. It must have shown on my face because Beckett managed to calm down enough to say, Captain Mitchell, meet my new RPS and comms officer, Lieutenant Jack Kirby. The other captain turned towards me and shook my hand. Beckett went back to laughing and wiping their eyes. You see, Lieutenant, said Mitchell, when we were in academy together, Beckett carried this old pocket watch of their grandfather's because they were always worried about being late. And because they're so pale, I called them the White Rabbit. Beckett regained some control. Yes, and ever since then you find me rabbit something or other as a gift. Although, I think this is the best one yet. Aw, I thought you liked the Zero-G float toy the best. she teased. Beckett started to chuckle again, cleared their throat, and became more serious. Jack, can you go up to the med bay and let them know that the Roanoke shuttle is here? Now I realized why the captain asked me to come with them. I tried not to glare, as I replied flatly, Yes, sir. I turned to the lift. Moody one, him, yeah? I heard Captain Mitchell say as I walked away. He's the reason we're not sending you back with a corpse, Andy, Beckett said, as the lift doors closed. When I reached the med bay, Marcia was already there, with a bustling crowd of nurses prepping the biobed. Marta was on it, but still awake. Marcia reassuring her that she'd be home soon. I gulped as I walked toward the bed. Marcia turned towards me. Oh, good, Jack, you're here. Marta wanted to talk to you before they sedated her for the trip. Okay. The captain said the shuttle's here and ready for her. I was trying to look anywhere but at the woman on the bed. Her arm that she had cut was healed, but still showed a pink scar. Marta grabbed my arm. I'm so sorry, Jack, she said through tears. I just couldn't... Marta faltered. I put my hand over hers and finally looked her in the eye. Listen, it's okay, I get it. I hope you get home okay. Marta gave me a small ghost of a smile and let go of my hand. Marcia motioned me back as the doctor swarmed in and started the sedation process. We sat on one of the benches in the room and waited until they took the gurney into the lift. Thank you, Marcia said. For what? I asked. For not giving her platitudes or telling her that everything's going to be okay. It's not. Not for a while. It'll take her some time to readjust to being dirtside, but she'll be better off being a colony desk jockey than doing pre-call work. How'd she get out here in the first place? Don't they screen for deep space syndrome? They do, but testing doesn't always account for actually being in deep space. Space is massive, Jack. Sometimes that massiveness breaks people. I nodded and stared blankly at the now empty medbay. I understood that. Memories threatened to surface again, but I managed to focus on Marcia and shove the bad stuff back into the abyss. I looked back at her as she was giving me a searching look. She looked away again and said, I hear there's some chocolate in my feature. Yeah, the captain of the Roanoke brought the crew some Genovian chocolate and some cocoa powder for the cook, I answered. And you should have seen the huge chocolate rabbit she brought for the captain. Marcia laughed. It was a deep, warm laugh that seemed to lift the air of melancholy they were in. That woman and her rabbits. Last year she brought them a 5-kilo rabbit piñata filled with candy for the captain's birthday. That was quite the party. How she gets around the cargo weight limits with these things, I'll never know. Come on, I want to go see this thing. She stood up and led the way to the lift. I laughed and followed her into the lift. Never underestimate Supply Corps officers, man. Chapter 4. Jack. The buzzing got louder the closer they got to where faint human life signs were leading them. Jack silently signaled to Cooper to move around to the other side. The large leaves obscured the view of the biology team's first campsite away from the main pre-call settlement. He could hear a slurping sound now, too. He shifted the leaves in front of him slowly and quietly, trying to tamp down the fear. Large insect-like things were feasting on what was left of the biology team. Jack's training kept him from screaming, but fear paralyzed him for a moment. Then the sound of a voice on the other side of the camp shouted, Michael! Jack stabbed at the retreat signal on his wristcom, then made his way to Cooper. When he reached the other man, another of the soldiers was pulling him back. Let me go! That's my husband! Jack ran up to him and slapped him. Dumbass, we gotta run! But before they turned away, Jack realized that the buzzing had suddenly stopped. He turned around slowly to come face to face with one of the bugs. Before he could scream, the thing lunged forward. Fuck me, I said, waking up and trying to clear my head of the nightmare. My sheets were damp with sweat. I looked at my wristcom. 5:30. I sighed. No use trying to get back to sleep, even if I have 3 more hours before I really have to get up. Good thing about being an RPS is that I didn't have to get up at the crack of dawn. The bad thing was the nightmares that woke me up anyway. I threw on some gym clothes, put a uniform in my gym bag, and headed for the rec area. The first shift regulars were already there. I shoved my bag in a cubby and looked around. A few people waved to me, and to my surprise, so did Marcia, who was stretching on a mat. "Fancy meeting you here, Jack. You're up early." Marcia continued to stretch out her legs. I sat on the other side of the mat and started my own light stretching. "Yeah," I said. "I forgot about the tea." The chaplain laughed. "I should make you a cup before you go off shift for the day. That way I know you're getting some sleep." I eyed her. "I sleep." She eyed me back. "Not enough." She sat up fully. "Come on, let's go for a run, and not on the treadmill." Marcia stood up and held out her hand to me. I grudgingly took it. What else did I have to do this early in the morning? We walked out into the hall. "How many circuits can you do?" she asked. I shrugged. "I usually do 2 or 3 or so for a normal workout. I did the Academy half marathon back in the day." "All right, let's go then." She headed down the center of the corridor where the floor was designated for runners. It was only a slight difference, but the lower G, if you ran against the spin, gave a lot of people vertigo, so most people ran the other direction. I wasn't keen on doing station circuits because it always felt like running uphill the whole way, but I had to admit, I really didn't feel like staying in the gym. Marcia kept at a steady pace, and for a while we just ran. "I'm happy with your work here so far, Jack," she said, after we passed the half-kilometer mark. "You've done a great job keeping things organized, and you did a great job with Marta a couple months ago." Thanks. I didn't really do much. I really didn't want to talk about Marta. I hope she was better off now. Sometimes you don't need to do much at all, really. Just be there for someone." "Yeah?" Marcia nodded. "Yeah. Presence and understanding are the core of what chaplains do. It's not all candles and incense." She smiled. "I've noticed, especially when you work in the med bay." Her smile waned a little. "That's true." We ran together quietly until we passed the kilometer marker. I watched Marcia run. While she was pretty fit, she wasn't a young woman. The gray in her hair reminded me then that she'd been doing this job for a really long time. I wonder why she stays out here. This can't be her first station posting. As if she was reading my thoughts, she asked, "What's on your mind, Jack?" "I was just wondering, why are you out here, doing this?" I asked, waving my hand at everything. She stopped running. I ran past her a few steps, then turned around. There was an enigmatic look on her face as she thought about what to say to me. "Do you mean why I'm a chaplain, or why did I decide to go into deep space?" Both, I suppose." She started walking, and I fell in beside her. The short answer is that I was called by the spirits I work with to do the work that I do. That call led me to Unity Fleet, and eventually to being here right now with you. "You believe in ghosts?" I asked. "How does a ghost call you to do this work?" "Not ghosts, Jack. Spirits. Or what some folks might call deities." She shook her head. "I suppose we should have had the religion conversation earlier," she said to herself. Then she looked at me again and said, "Answering your question is complicated. I think it would be easier if I ask you some things first. Do you believe in God or Allah or some other deity or being?" This time it was me who stopped in the middle of the track. No one had ever asked me that question before. Growing up, my parents didn't really believe in any particular religion, and religion on Earth isn't exactly a big deal, except for certain places. So, I don't know. I never really thought about it before. The chaplain smiled, but this smile had a mysterious edge to it that I wasn't sure how to explain. It was her, but more than her, as if there was a different Marcia hiding inside the Marcia I knew. "Okay, well, why don't you have a good think about that question for a couple of days, and then we'll come back to the reasons why I'm a chaplain. And really, give it some serious thought. It won't cost you your job or anything if you tell me you're an atheist. The RPS job doesn't require you to believe like I do, as long as you're open-minded about believers. Besides, knowing what you believe spiritually can also help with other aspects of your own mental health. I looked at her again. The smile was still there, but had gone back to being just Marcia. What the hell was that? I wondered. Okay, I will, I said out loud. The chaplain glanced at her wristcom and started running again. Good. We'll have a good chat about it later. Now, though, we need to finish this circuit, or I'm going to be late for my first appointment. She looked over her shoulder at me, then started running faster. Oh, come on, seriously? Damn it, I hate running uphill, I thought as I tried to catch up with her. Do you believe in God? I asked Commander Foster on my next comm shift. Foster shrugged. I suppose, kinda. Why do you want to know? I was having a talk with Marcia yesterday, and I asked her why she's a chaplain. She didn't really give me an answer, but asked me what I believed instead. But I'm not really sure what the answer is. You definitely are an Earther, aren't you? Ensign Cho, the new watch officer who had replaced Marta, said with a laugh. What's that supposed to mean? Earth isn't much into religion these days because most of the hardcore religion folks scarpered out into space. Most of the hardcore believers went to colonies and then turned their backs on unity. Don't get me wrong, I learned about my ancestors from my grandma, and I know how to light my incense, but I was never forced into it. Interesting. How do you know so much about this? History nerd, she said. I have a master's in Unity history. I looked at Foster, who gave a grin. Cho's great to have on your trivia team. Cho stuck out her tongue at him. I only let you on my team because you know more about pop culture than I do. Anyway, you never fully answered Kirby's question. Foster looked thoughtful for a moment, then said, Well, my mom and dad went to one of those progressive churches while we were growing up. I liked it because I got to hang out with other kids most of the time, but I thought the services were kind of boring. I like going to Marcia's services once in a while, since she's pretty open-minded for clergy. Anyway, when I joined the service and started working out here, I became more agnostic. I think there's some sort of intelligence in the universe, but I don't really need to pin a name on it or anything. I mean, I've seen enough out here to convince me some sort of something calling the shots. I still wasn't sure what to think for myself, although what Foster said made sense. Interesting. Thanks, both of you. Foster looked up from his station. Any time. Cho just gave a smile. I went back to sorting correspondence. I finished the previous batch I was working on, then started on the next. The screen lit up as several messages came up red priority, with a lot of large files attached. Several were for the captain, but more were for the CMO. Commander, I just had a bunch of red priority messages come in. Several are marked for the captain and the CMO. Route the one that's marked for the CMO to Carr. The duty officer in the med lab will have the joy of waking him up. Foster punched in the code in his console. Beckett, said the captain in a sleepy voice. Priority red message from pre-call, sir. Messages for you and the CMO. Jack's already routed the CMOs. Right, route the rest to my quarters. Tell the CMO I'll be with him in an hour. Acknowledged. Ops out. Foster replied and closed the channel. You heard them, Kirby. Send out whatever you got. If there's any more, let me know. Yes, sir. The PTSD monster in my gut stirred again, but I ignored it and scoured the comms traffic, on alert for other priority messages. The rest of the batches were just normal correspondence. I left my comm shift that morning wondering why my shoulders and neck were aching. You have been listening to Tales from Flat Space. If you want to support me in my writing, there are many ways to do it. Share this podcast, follow me on my Twitch channel, or buy my books. All you have to do is go to revgenapon.net and click on the relevant links. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.